We go to New York now, where the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly kicks off in New York next week ahead of the high-level segment later this month in what's expected again to be a largely virtual event. And to preview what's historically the busiest time at the UN headquarters, with so much going on around the world, from pandemics to geopolitical tensions, we bring you this exclusive discussion with the UN Secretary-General, who's standing by with our colleague Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, over to you.
Peter, thank you very much indeed, and you correctly point out that we are not quite sure how many people, particularly heads of state and heads of government, will actually be inside this building here at UN headquarters in New York. Of course, we are expecting, because of the pandemic, that it will be a largely hybrid/virtual affair. A lot of heads of state and government will submit pre-recorded videos, particularly for the general debate, but we do expect more people to come to New York as opposed to what we saw here last year. And one of the people that will be in this building during a high-level week in particular will be the UN Chief, UN Secretary-General António Guterres, who is my guest. Secretary-General, welcome back to SABC News. It's good to see you. The incoming President of the General Assembly has chosen the following theme for the incoming session: building resilience through hope, to recover from COVID-19, rebuild sustainability, respond to the needs of the planet, respect the rights of people, and revitalize the United Nations, right? That's the theme. But I say to that, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Tigray, Hurricane Ida, a raging and deadly pandemic, vaccine inequity, climate change, climate catastrophe, and of course the list goes on. So despite the idealism in that vision statement, what do you think?
Well, I think the President of the General Assembly did well to choose what the world should do to face the challenges that you mentioned. But I think it will be my duty, and I intend to do it in my own intervention, to ring the alarm bell. The present situation is totally unacceptable. Look at the COVID. We are not able to defeat the COVID because of egoism, because of inequity in the distribution of vaccines. Can you imagine there are countries with 80% of the population vaccinated? In Africa, there are countries with 2% of the population vaccinated. This is totally unacceptable. I've been asking for months and months, we need an emergency task force putting together the countries that produce and the countries that can produce vaccines. At the same time, the international financial institutions, WHO, dealing with the pharma industry to create the conditions to double the production of vaccines and to have an equitable distribution. What we see, countries taking care of themselves, sometimes giving some donations just to show that they behave nice. But the truth is that with this dramatic inequity, we are allowing the virus to defeat us all. Because with the mutations that can take place when the virus transmits among millions and millions of people in the global south, one mutation, and we are already talking about that possibility, will one day make the vaccines totally useless. So this is the moment in which we need to tell the world we are in the wrong direction. We are at the verge of the abyss. And in climate change, we are in a similar situation. I mean, we are close, less than 2 months from the COP26, and I have not yet seen the building of trust necessary between the developed world and developing world in order to be able to create the conditions for a success in COP26, for a common commitment to reduce greenhouse gases by almost 50% in the next decade and reach carbon neutrality in the middle of the century. And just to give you another example, I mean, the injustice in the recovery. Rich countries, like here in the US, some European countries, they are spending more or less 28% of their gross domestic product in the recovery projects to relaunch their economies, to support their people. Now, middle-income countries are doing about 6%. And low-income countries 2%, and 2% of much less. This is totally unacceptable. I've been asking for special drawing rights since the beginning, but special drawing rights are distributed proportionally to the quota, so the rich get much more. I was hoping for massive distribution of special drawing rights. I have not yet seen it. I mean, debt. I mean, we need debt alleviation. I can't accept that governments have to choose between paying their debts or giving basic support to their people that is sinking in poverty and some in hunger. So I think it's time to say we are going in the wrong direction. We need to change course. And so we need the things the President of the General Assembly do, but we need the political will to do it. And I think the developed world has here a particular responsibility.
When you were re-elected to a second term in June this year, you said we are writing our own history, and the choices we make right now, it can go either way: breakdown and perpetual crisis, or breakthrough and prospect of a greener, safer and better future for all. It sounds like we are breaking down and heading into
At the present moment,
crisis.
we are breaking down, and we need to change course to have a breakthrough.
Is this a failure
we need to have vaccine equity.
Is it a failure of multilateralism?
No. It is a failure.
It looks like a failure of multilateralism.
Multilateral institutions have no teeth. Multilateralism.
So the United Nations has no teeth, right?
Let me explain. We all agree that each country cannot solve the problem by itself. We all agree that we need international cooperation, that we need some global governance. And for that, we need multilateral institutions with power, with authority. Look at WHO. WHO is not able to guarantee that they have access to the information about what's going on in a country.
Right.
WHO has no authority to share that information or to do an investigation about what has happened.
You're talking about China right now as it pertains to the pandemic.
It's valid for China as it could be valid for any other country. We need multilateral institutions with teeth. The only one that has some teeth is the Security Council, but as you know, it has had little appetite to bite.
Or to reform.
Or to reform. But even as it is, there are a number of powers that could be exercised, and indeed the divisions. And we are seeing a division among the biggest powers in the world that is extremely dangerous. Look, very recently, John Kerry went to China, and the Chinese said, well, how can we cooperate in climate if we don't cooperate on other things? So we are creating a system in which everything is blocking everything, and this is totally unacceptable. We need to find a way in which, independently of their differences, independently of different strategies, different concepts of political life, different perspectives of human rights that we know exist, it's essential that the world comes together to defeat COVID, to defeat climate change, and to create conditions for more justice and more equity, and for people in Africa to have a chance to have a job, for hunger to be fought, and for extreme poverty to be eradicated.
And of course, a better working relationship between Beijing and Washington is key to achieving these goals, is it not?
It is absolutely essential that the big powers come together to address these kind of challenges. Then they can divide on other things, but these kind of challenges can only be beaten, can only be defeated, can only be faced if the world is able to act together. And let me say, it's not only about the big powers. You see divisions here and there on the most different circumstances. I mean, trust is what is more dramatically missing in the world. If we want to have hope, and I have hope in the future, we need to rebuild trust.
There's too much misinformation in the world, particularly around vaccines, Secretary General. I mean, what do you make of this time, this era we're in?
We are witnessing a very dangerous situation in which some people talk about the death of truth. Now, everybody can say whatever, and people say, well, there is no truth, it depends on each one of us. Now, I think it's important to establish the principle of truth, the principle of scientific evidence, the principle of honesty. One of my favorite sentences is, let's make lying wrong again.
You know, you mentioned the World Health Organization. I wanted to talk about what happened today. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, the Director General, called for a moratorium on booster shots for those already considered fully vaccinated. That used to be 2 shots, Secretary General. What's your view, given this debate that's ongoing now, particularly in a country where you live, in the United States, where they're talking about a third booster now?
Problem is not... The essential problem is not that. The essential problem is any inequality in the distribution of vaccines. Because if there was equality in the distribution of vaccines, that problem would not be placed. And that basic inequality, unfortunately, I have not yet seen the instruments to address it, and it's vital to address them.
What does building back better look like? We often talk about building back better when we talk about the pandemic, when we talk about women's rights, when we talk about climate change.
We are spending trillions of dollars, especially the rich countries are spending trillions of dollars to relaunch their economies. And they are still giving a lot of money to fossil fuels. They are not really using that money to change the economy, to make it more inclusive, with more justice, with more equity, equality among their citizens and among countries, and to have a greener future. I mean, we know that climate change is creating devastating impacts already. I mean, we are in the center of the rich world, in New York. We had some rain a few days ago. 45 people died in the vicinity of New York. I mean, this proves how vulnerable even the center of the financial system in the world is to climate change. So, I mean, this is the moment in which people need to understand that it's a matter of survival for everybody.
Let me push you on the fossil fuel notion. Does the notion of common but differentiated responsibility still hold, given the urgency we're seeing and given the fact that some countries are still building coal-powered
I think that there must be a mobilization of the developed countries to support the countries that still have a huge dependence on coal, but they need support to come out of it.
A country like South Africa.
South Africa, for instance, because of the historic reasons that you know, but South Africa needs support. That's why we have been claiming that we need to guarantee that developed countries apply what they have promised in Paris, and they had promised before to mobilize at least $100 billion per year, and it should be more, in order to support developing countries, both in the reduction of emissions, but also in helping to build resilience of their communities, of their infrastructure, that are now under enormous pressure because of the storms, because of the drought, because of all the devastating impacts of climate change.
I want to talk about country-specific situations. Afghanistan, of course, front and center right now. One of the largest humanitarian crises in the world today, a new Taliban government that does not include a single woman in its leadership. You talked about how the Taliban needs international legitimacy, financial support. What should international engagement with the Taliban today look like?
I think, first of all, we need to provide for the Afghan people that is suffering enormously. That is the reason why I sent my head of the humanitarian affairs, Martin Griffith, to Kabul. I think it was the first visit at ministerial level to Kabul to speak with to speak about how to deliver humanitarian aid, how to guarantee that it's delivered in a way that is totally, impartial, and at the same time to discuss some of the concerns we have in relation to women's rights, to the right of girls, and some other aspects that are, of course, of great concern to us. I think his visit was a positive one. Of course, there's still a long way to go and a lot of unpredictability. We have launched yesterday an appeal to mobilize the international community. I will preside a conference in Geneva on Monday, and I think we need to show the Afghan people that we are here to help them and to address their humanitarian needs. On the other hand, there is a political dimension, and I think it's important that all the countries that have leverage, that have relations with the Taliban, to do everything that is possible to make the Taliban, that need recognition, that want the sanctions to end, that need international support.
Yeah.
That's important that they have an inclusive government. That's important that they have a basic human rights respected. Of course, I don't intend to ask for them to be Switzerland, but they have basic, and the question of women and girls is very important, that terrorism is not allowed to operate from Afghanistan, and other aspects. But I think it's essential to engage.
Yeah.
At the present moment, we need to engage with them, to tell them what we believe, what we think they should do. I'm not sure if we'll be successful or not. Nobody can predict the future, but we need to be able, first of all, to help the Afghan people in this desperate situation, and second, to engage with the Taliban, telling them frankly what we believe is the right thing to do.
This chaotic withdrawal that we saw from Afghanistan of US and NATO forces really speaks to the broader moment. We are about to mark the 20th anniversary of the attacks on 9/11. I wonder, what is hindsight, this whole process, this full circle moment, what it teaches us? What does it teach you?
Well, I think it teaches many things. And one of the things that it teaches is that the international community needs to be much more careful in the way it handles crisis situations. We have seen the failure in Afghanistan. We have seen what has happened in Iraq. We have seen what has happened in Libya. I think it's time to think seriously what is the best way to help countries in these dramatic situations, what is the best way to allow them to overcome that challenge. And there is a lot of discussion, a lot of reflection, a lot of humility that we all need to have to think about it. I have no magic solutions, but it is clear that what has been done until now in a number of situations like these did not work. So time to think about how to do better.
Let's talk a bit about Tigray, Ethiopia. Your request for a ceasefire, unimpeded humanitarian access and creation of conditions for political dialogue has yet to receive the full backing of the UN Security Council. Some members of the Council, China, Russia in particular, view this as an internal matter while the situation deteriorates, Secretary General. You've also seen the appointment of an AU envoy, former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo. The Tigray People's Liberation Front has accused the AU of partiality towards the Ethiopian government. They don't believe the AU is an honest broker. What do you make of that scenario?
Well, I've been engaging very frequently with Prime Minister Abiy. Through my envoy or my interlocutor, Martin Griffith, we have been engaging also with the leadership of the TPLF. And that was the context in which I made an appeal for an immediate cessation of hostilities, able to create the conditions for a negotiated ceasefire, for unimpeded humanitarian access to all areas in Tigray, but also in Amhara and Afar, where fighting is also taking place, and at the same time to start a serious political dialogue about the future. These are the things we have been advocating for. Until now, let's be honest, with not much success. The African Union, I had positive dialogues with Prime Minister Abiy. I had a letter from the head of TPLF answering my appeal with, I would say, some also constructive dimensions, but we are not yet there. And I hope President Obasanjo, the UN will be fully supporting him, backstopping his mission. We believe in African leadership, in the solution of African problems. I hope President Obasanjo will be able to cut this Gordian knot. It's like the chicken and the egg. All sides are waiting for the other side to do something. And indeed, we need to really stop, because the suffering of the Ethiopian people is already dramatic. And Ethiopia was a central piece in the stability of that part of the world. That is very important to preserve.
Which side is the egg and which side is the chicken?
Well, we never know where is the egg and where is the chicken, because, as you know, that problem has never been solved by all the scientists in the world.
Two more questions for you, Secretary General. Last year, during your Mandela lecture, you talked about the growing inequality pandemic faced by the world and the need for a new social contract for a new era. There were elements of inequity with criminality and, of course, politics in the recent riots in South Africa after former President Jacob Zuma was imprisoned for contempt of court. Some saw this as the unraveling of the Mandela dream. Others saw this as an affirmation of the rule of law. How did you see it?
Well, I trust the democratic institutions in South Africa, and I believe that the democratic institutions in South Africa are able to solve the problems of the country. And I have to say I have an enormous admiration for what South Africa has managed. After all decades of apartheid. Of course, it will be difficult, it will be complex. South Africa has dramatic inequality problems that we know. It's not only South Africa, it's the whole world. But I wish that South Africans are able to solve their problems, because South Africa is a key pillar of our international architecture. It's a key pillar in Africa, but it's a key pillar in the global international architecture. It's member of the BASIC. South Africa is member of the group of the Great
20,
Emerging...
BRICS.
The BRICS, the
G20.
So South Africa is a very important interlocutor, and I must say I very frequently have the chance to talk to your president. I gained an enormous admiration for him, and I think he is today one of the most influent actors, unfortunately not always able to make his point of view prevail because of these egoism and divisions that we see in the world.
Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka is no longer your executive director for UN Women. I wonder what you made of her 2 terms as the head of the agency.
I think she's fantastic. We worked extremely well together. She's a stateswoman, but she's a militant, she's an activist, and she's a very nice person. It's a pleasure to work with her, and I'm very proud that I'm her friend.
Final question, what do you hope? We're going into September now. It's a busy couple of weeks at the UN. Some heads of state will come. I don't know if President Joe Biden will be coming. There's some talk that he might or might not. What do you make of this moment? Final word to you.
I would like to make them wake up.
How are you going to do that?
I think we are slipping into a disaster in the world, and leaders need to wake up.
Well, set your alarm clocks. Secretary General, thank you very much indeed.
To wake up, I hope the alarm clock can work.
António Guterres is the United Nations Secretary General in conversation with us here on SABC News as we preview the high-level week of the UN General Assembly, the 76th session. That starts officially the 14th of September, but high-level week the 20th of September. And we kick that off with the SDG moment, our second SDG moment. And Peter Ndoro, guess who'll be co-hosting that?
Thank you very much, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. That's our correspondent in New York's very high-level conversation there with the Secretary General of the United Nations. And it usually is a very busy time at the United Nations at this time of the year. But we don't know how busy this year in terms of numbers of people, as you've heard there from Sherwin. And hopefully you can catch that conversation again a little bit later on.